My in-laws secretly transferred my husband's business to his ex-wife. They thought I'd cry and leave quietly, but they forgot who actually owned the land it was built on. The night was thick with laughter, the sound of clinking glasses filling the air, and the soft hum of jazz playing in the background. But as I stood at the edge of the room watching the celebration unfold before me, I could feel the weight of the situation pressing on my chest. They thought I didn't know. They thought I was just another wife who'd crumble when faced with betrayal. My husband's ex-wife, with that smug smile plastered across her face, was the centerpiece of it all, the star of the show. She beamed, the picture of victory, while my in-laws congratulated her on her new position, running the company that my husband had built from the ground up. I couldn't help but smirk to myself. They had no idea that I had already won. They thought I was the victim, the one who would cry and leave quietly as they had all expected. But the truth was, they had underestimated me in every way. I wasn't going anywhere. They had just handed me the ultimate power play. First off, I just want to express my gratitude to all of you for being a part of this incredible adventure. If these empowering stories resonate with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It's free and helps us grow this amazing community together. Now let's jump right in. The lavish affair was held at the company's headquarters, an impressive building that towered over the city, with sleek glass windows reflecting the dim lights from the street below. The entire space felt too clean, too perfect, and yet, it was tainted by the laughter of people who had wronged me. The air seemed thick, saturated with greed and betrayal. I didn't need to say a word. I didn't need to make a scene. Everything was already in motion. I had been planning this for months, watching, waiting, calculating. As I took a step into the dimly lit room, I saw my husband's ex-wife, Rachel, surrounded by my in-laws. Her delicate fingers fluttered as she spoke animatedly, her voice high-pitched with excitement as she regaled them with the success of her new role. To anyone else, she looked like the perfect picture of accomplishment. But to me, she was nothing more than a puppet, a pawn in a much bigger game. And she didn't even know it. I watched as she laughed, her eyes sparkling with the victory she thought she had achieved. She had just signed a deal with the company board, gaining control over everything my husband had built. His family, too, was on her side, convinced that Rachel was the right one to lead the company forward. They had all been so quick to erase me from the picture, to reduce me to nothing more than a forgotten footnote in a tale they thought they had already rewritten. But the truth was far from what they expected. Rachel caught my eye across the room, and for a moment her smile faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. I watched as her gaze flickered toward the others, seeking reassurance, but there was no need. He thought she had won after all. I didn't even need to say a word for her to know that she was wrong. The moment felt surreal. It was as if the world had frozen around me. The clinking glasses, the chatter, the background music. Everything seemed distant. The only thing I could focus on was the sheer arrogance in Rachel's expression. It was the look of someone who had everything, who believed that nothing and no one could stand in her way. But I knew better. I'd been quiet, observant, and patient for far too long. They had all underestimated me, thinking I was weak because I wasn't loud, because I didn't throw tantrums or make a scene. What they didn't know was that I wasn't the type to lash out impulsively. I was methodical. I planned my moves carefully, calculating each one with precision. And right now I was about to change the game entirely. As I stood there, the weight of their ignorance settled over me like a cloak. The quiet, smug satisfaction I felt was almost intoxicating. They thought I was powerless. They thought they had taken everything from me. But I wasn't the one who had been stripped of my power. They had given it to me willingly. I made my way toward the bar, ordering a drink to steady my nerves. The bartender gave me a knowing smile, as though he could sense something stirring beneath my calm exterior. But there was nothing to say. There was no need to speak aloud when I had everything in place. The pieces were aligned, and all it took now was for the game to play out. The seconds dragged on, each one stretching into what felt like hours. I caught my reflection in the polished glass behind the bar, watching as my hand clenched around the glass in front of me. I had always been someone who kept their emotions in check, but tonight, everything was different. Tonight I had a plan, and it was going to change everything. I took a deep breath and turned back toward the crowd. My eyes met Rachel's once again, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of doubt behind her confident facade. She didn't know it yet, but everything was about to come crashing down around her. I had no intention of leaving quietly. No, that wasn't how this was going to play out. Rachel, my in-laws, the board. None of them knew what I had been doing behind the scenes. They had all believed that they could control the narrative, that they could destroy everything my husband and I had worked for. But what they didn't realize was that the land beneath the company's feet was mine. It had always been mine. And I had made sure that no one could take it from me. They had gambled with power, assuming I would be the weak link in this twisted chain. They had failed to see the cards I held in my hand, the quiet strength that came from knowing how to play the game. And as the party raged on, I knew it was only a matter of time before they realized just how wrong they had been. The first move was already made, and now the real game would begin. The taste of victory was sweet, but it wasn't just about winning this battle. It was about something more profound, something more personal. I wasn't just reclaiming what was mine. I was ensuring that they would never forget who I was. And by the time they did, it would be too late. As I finished my drink and set the empty glass down on the bar, I took one last glance around the room. The party continued, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. But as I left the bar, I knew that the tides were already turning. The plan was set and there was no turning back. The game was mine to win. The hum of the party still echoed in my ears as I walked away from the bar, every step purposeful. The air felt thick, charged with anticipation, yet nothing in that room could compare to the quiet storm brewing within me. I wasn't sure if it was the champagne or the burning anger that had started to simmer beneath my skin, but I knew that I was in control. Every smile, every laugh, every congratulatory handshake Rachel received only made the fire inside me burn hotter. She thought she had won. My in-laws thought they had outsmarted me. But there was one thing they didn't realize. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. I could hear my husband's voice in the back of my mind, trying to reason with me, telling me I should just let it go. Let it go, he said, as if that was even an option. How could I let this go? How could I let them think they had stolen everything from me and get away with it? How could I let them erase me like I was nothing? I walked through the party with slow, deliberate steps, my eyes never leaving Rachel. Her laugh was too loud, her confidence too forced. She stood there with my in-laws as if they were all part of the same happy family. They smiled at her as if she was the one who had built the empire from scratch, the one who had kept everything afloat. They were blind to the truth. They couldn't see the puppet strings she was pulling, nor could they understand that she wasn't the one holding the power. She was just a tool, a means to an end. And they were the ones who had handed her that tool, thinking it would get them what they wanted. They had underestimated me. That was their first mistake. I was never the type to lash out. I never yelled, never screamed. I didn't need to. Instead, I was methodical. I played the long game. They assumed I would break down, cry, or confront them in some dramatic fit. What they didn't know was that I had been laying the foundation for this moment for months. I had waited for this moment and I had planned every move. I wasn't just going to walk away from this. I wasn't going to let them tear apart everything my husband and I had built, and I certainly wasn't going to let them think they had beaten me. I stood by the door for a moment, watching them from across the room, and I let the anger settle into something colder, something sharper. The eyes of Rachel and my in-laws were too busy bouncing between one another, too absorbed in their celebration to even glance in my direction. They thought they were untouchable, sitting at the top of the world, basking in the victory they had stolen from us. I couldn't help but smile to myself. They were wrong. They were all wrong. As I stood there, deep in thought, I noticed a few members of the board enter the room. Their faces were familiar, but their expressions were tight, their steps cautious. They knew exactly what was at stake here, and they had a far clearer understanding of who the real puppet master was. I could feel the shift in the room. The energy had changed. There was a subtle discomfort now, and I knew why. My in-laws, they had no idea how close they were to losing everything. I kept my distance from the chaos, letting Rachel continue to bask in her newfound power, unaware that the walls were slowly closing in on her. My role in all of this was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. I'd let them all think they had won, but the truth was, I had been the one pulling the strings from the very beginning. I let the seconds pass, drawing out the suspense until I finally turned and walked toward the back hallway. The noise of the party seemed to fade, muffled behind thick walls as I made my way to a quiet corner. This was my chance to regroup, to think clearly without the noise of their arrogance clouding my mind. I was alone, but I wasn't vulnerable. The room might have been filled with people, but I was the one in control. I sat in an empty office, and for a moment, I let the reality of the situation hit me. This was my husband's business. This was our business. Yet here I was, having to watch it all slip away because of a betrayal orchestrated by people who should have been loyal. The feeling of loss, of betrayal was sharp, but underneath it there was something stronger. Something more dangerous. They had pushed me into a corner, assuming I wouldn't fight back. They thought I was just another woman to be dismissed, to be pushed aside. But they were wrong. I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to fade into the background. No, this was far from over. A few minutes passed before I pulled out my phone, unlocking it with a steady hand. I had already anticipated this moment. I'd been researching, planning, gathering every piece of information I could find. I scrolled through the files I had saved, the documents that detailed the transactions, the manipulations, the loopholes. Everything I needed to take them down. The land. The business. The contracts. It was all mine. The land had always been mine. I had made sure of it. While they had been distracted by their petty power struggles, I had secured what mattered most. My grip on the business, the foundation it was built upon. None of them could take that from me. Not Rachel. Not my in-laws. No one. I exhaled, feeling the weight of my decision settle into my bones. This was it. The moment they realized just how badly they had miscalculated. The calm before the storm. I was playing my cards close to my chest, and they had no idea how deep the hole they were digging really was. Suddenly, the door creaked open and I turned to see my husband standing there, his face a mask of concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice quiet but filled with uncertainty. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked at him, letting the silence stretch between us. He had no idea what was going on, what was about to happen. He was still caught in the web of their lies, still believing that everything would return to normal. But he needed to understand. He needed to see the truth. I took a deep breath. "They think they've won," I said finally, my voice steady. "But they haven't. They've made a huge mistake. And I'm going to make sure they regret it." He blinked, confusion clouding his features. But before he could say anything, I held up a hand, signaling for him to listen. "This is my fight," I continued, my tone firm. "And I'm not backing down." He stood there for a moment, the silence between us heavy, before nodding slowly. I could see the shift in his expression, the realization dawning in his eyes. Maybe he didn't fully understand yet, but he would. They all would. Soon enough, they would all learn that betraying me was their biggest mistake. The conflict had been set in motion. And I was ready to finish what they had started. The silence that followed my husband's hesitant nod felt thick, almost suffocating. He stood there, unsure of how to proceed, his eyes searching mine for answers that I wasn't ready to give. I could feel the weight of his confusion, but I wasn't about to ease it just yet. The quiet wasn't my enemy, it was my ally. And as much as I wanted to rush forward with my plans, as much as the urge to confront them head-on burned deep inside me, I knew better. The long game had already begun, and it was crucial that I didn't show my hand too soon. "I'll take care of it," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded again, but I could see the questions swirling in his mind. He wanted to ask more, to understand what I was planning, but he knew me better than to push. There was something about my tone, something in the way I had spoken, that told him to trust me. I was in control, and I was about to show him just how much. I turned away from him, needing space to gather my thoughts. The plan was set, and I had to keep my emotions in check. I couldn't afford to let anything slip now, not when everything was teetering on the edge. The next steps had to be calculated, precise. I had no room for mistakes. The business was already crumbling in ways no one else could see yet. My in-laws thought they had it all figured out, but they had missed the cracks that had started to appear beneath the surface. It wasn't just the transfer of the company to Rachel that had set this in motion. No, it was deeper than that. It was the subtle manipulation, the financial missteps, and the hidden deals that no one had thought to question. I had been watching, waiting, and now it was time to move. I pulled out my phone, typing a few quick messages. Each one was a small move, a simple step in a much larger plan. I had connections in places they couldn't even imagine. It was funny how they all assumed I was just some passive bystander in their game. But the truth was, I had been building my own network, gathering the information they so foolishly ignored. I had contacts in banking, in real estate, and in legal circles. And now it was time for them to see just how much power I held. My fingers moved quickly over the keys as I made another note in my calendar. An important meeting that was going to turn everything around. The one thing that my in-laws had never taken into account was that the land the business sat on was mine. It wasn't just some piece of property that could be transferred or sold away. It was my security, my leverage, my power. And they had no idea that I had already taken steps to ensure that no one could ever take it from me. I stopped typing, letting the weight of my decision settle in. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was mine. It was about showing them that I wasn't someone to be dismissed, that I wouldn't just sit back and watch as they took everything from me. This was personal, and I was ready to make them pay for every minute of it. The plan unfolded in my mind, each step more precise than the last. The next few weeks would be critical. I had to keep my movements discreet, keep everything under the radar until it was time to strike. And while my husband remained caught in the web of his family's lies, I knew it was only a matter of time before he saw the truth. The phone buzzed in my hand, pulling me from my thoughts. A text from my lawyer. I had expected it. This was the first step in the series of moves I had initiated. The response was clear. The documents I had requested were ready. This was the leverage I had been waiting for. With the right signatures, the right timing, I could lock down the business and leave my in-laws with nothing. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the realization of it all sink in. The power I held wasn't just in the land beneath the business. It was in the web of connections I had built over the years. Every detail, every conversation, every quiet meeting in the shadows. It had all led me to this moment. They had underestimated me, thinking I was just a quiet, dutiful wife who wouldn't dare challenge them. But they hadn't seen the true depth of my resolve. They hadn't seen the quiet rage that burned beneath the surface, fueling everything I did. I couldn't help but smile to myself. They had made the mistake of thinking I was passive, thinking I was weak. But now it was time for them to learn that nothing could be further from the truth. Every move they made, every action they took was leading them directly into my trap. I stood up, pacing the room as I mentally rehearsed the next few moves. I had been too patient for too long, but now it was time to take the reins. The moment they realized what was happening, it would be too late. My in-laws, so sure of their position, had no idea what was about to unfold. And Rachel, poor Rachel, who thought she was the one in control. She had no clue that I had been watching her every move. She had no idea that every decision she made was being carefully noted, every weakness exposed. She thought she was the one who had stolen my life, my husband's company. But she would soon learn that I was the one who had been playing the real game all along. The clock on the wall ticked, the seconds passing in rhythm with my racing thoughts. I could feel the pressure building, but it was different now. There was clarity in the chaos. I was ready. Every part of my plan was set in motion, and there was no turning back now. The pieces were aligning, and I was going to make sure that when it all came crashing down, it would be on my terms. I heard the sound of footsteps approaching the door, and without looking up, I knew it was my husband. He had been quiet for far too long, and I could feel his gaze on me as he entered the room. I didn't need to speak yet. I didn't need to reassure him, not when the storm was just beginning to brew. "I'm handling it," I said softly without turning around. He was quiet for a moment, but I could sense his uncertainty in the stillness of the room. "I know," he finally murmured. "I just don't understand how it all went so wrong." I felt a pang of sympathy, but I pushed it aside. Now wasn't the time for sympathy. Now was the time for action. "It's not over yet," I said, my voice firm. "But you'll understand soon enough. They've made their move, and now it's my turn." He didn't respond, but I could feel the weight of his doubts beginning to lift. Slowly he began to trust me, to see the quiet strength in my actions. I could see it in his eyes. He was starting to understand that this was my fight too, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I looked out the window, the dark sky looming over the city, and I knew this was only the beginning. The real game was just starting, and I wasn't going to lose. Not this time. The weight of the moment lingered in the air, pressing against my chest like a hand, slowly tightening with every breath I took. I had already made my move. The pieces were in motion, each one falling into place just as I had planned. But nothing could prepare me for the strange satisfaction I felt watching the slow, inevitable collapse of the business they thought they owned. The cracks had already begun to show, and I could see the inevitable destruction looming over them, over their arrogance, over their false sense of control. The next few days passed in a blur, a whirlwind of quiet meetings, phone calls, and strategic moves I couldn't afford to second-guess. I kept my distance from my husband as he struggled to understand what was happening. He had been so sure that everything would go back to normal after Rachel's takeover, so sure that his family would somehow fix everything. He didn't see the storm approaching. And he still couldn't fathom that it was too late to fix things now. But I had known it all along. The warning signs had been there for months. The accounting discrepancies. The strange behavior of certain board members. The rushed decisions made to push Rachel into the CEO position. Decisions made with little regard for the long-term health of the company. I had watched them all waiting for the right time. And now, the consequences of their actions were unfolding with perfect precision. I sat at my desk watching the news on my laptop as another report flashed across the screen. Company's stock continues to plummet amid financial struggles. The headline didn't surprise me. I had already seen this coming. I knew exactly how the media would spin the situation. The company was on the verge of collapsing and no one could blame me for the slow decay. They had done this to themselves. I was just the one holding the cards when it all went down. It was almost poetic, really. They had played the part of the puppet masters, pulling strings and manipulating everything to get what they wanted. But now the strings were in my hands and I was about to cut them all loose. I leaned back in my chair, allowing myself a rare moment of reflection. The anger had started to subside, replaced by a cold sense of determination. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. They had underestimated me for so long, assuming that I would sit quietly and watch as they destroyed everything I loved. But they were wrong. I had waited and now I was ready to strike. I could hear the faint buzz of my phone from across the room, pulling me from my thoughts. It was my lawyer. He had been with me from the beginning, helping me navigate the legal maze and ensuring that I had every piece of evidence I needed to move forward. I picked up the phone, my pulse quickening as I pressed it to my ear. "It's done," he said, his voice steady and calm. My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my tone neutral. "What do you mean, it's done?" "The paperwork is filed. The injunction is in place. The company can't access the land anymore." I let out a slow breath. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The legal blow that would cripple their ability to continue operating. The business might have been bleeding money for weeks now, but this was the death blow. They couldn't survive without the land. I had made sure of that. "You did good," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't need to say anything more. The battle was won. I hung up the phone, the weight of the moment settling over me. I had been calm, composed, but inside I felt a small flicker of triumph. They were finally going to see just how wrong they had been. I spent the rest of the afternoon poring over the reports, making sure everything was in place for the final phase of my plan. The company's finances were a mess, and I could practically hear the board members scrambling behind closed doors. They had no idea how quickly things were falling apart. Rachel, with her false confidence, would be the first to crumble. And when she did, it would all be over. As evening approached, I stood up and stretched, feeling the weight of the day settle into my muscles. The first wave of their downfall had been executed flawlessly, but I couldn't afford to stop now. I had to see this through. I had to make sure that no one could ever erase the hard work my husband and I had put into this business. I found myself walking into the kitchen, the quiet of the house almost unsettling after the chaos of the past few days. My husband was there, sitting at the table staring at his phone. He had been quiet lately, withdrawn, and I knew the toll this was taking on him. But there was nothing I could do to shield him from the reality of what had happened. He had to face the truth just like the rest of us. "Hey," I said softly, taking a seat across from him. He looked up, his expression weary. "Hey," he replied, offering a small, forced smile. "How's everything going?" I could see the hesitation in his eyes. He wanted to ask more, to understand what was really happening, but he didn't want to push. He still didn't know the full extent of what I had done, but soon enough he would. "Everything's fine," I said, my tone even. "It's just a matter of time now." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean? What's going on?" I didn't want to say too much just yet. It wasn't the right time. Instead, I took a deep breath and shifted the conversation. "I've been thinking about what comes next. Once this is over, we'll need to figure out what we want to do." He nodded slowly, but I could tell that his mind was elsewhere. I wasn't sure if he fully understood how deep the situation had gotten or if he was just too afraid to face it head-on. Either way, I knew that I was the one holding the reins now. I was the one who had planned this, and I was the one who would see it through. The next few days were filled with meetings, more legal maneuvers and increasingly frantic phone calls from the board members who still believed they could salvage the company. But they were too late. The foundation had already been cracked. The pieces they had tried so hard to hold together were slipping through their fingers, and I was watching it all unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and disbelief. How had they not seen it coming? How had they thought they could control this? I couldn't help but wonder how Rachel felt now. The woman who had taken everything from me, who had waltzed into my life with her arrogant confidence, thinking she could just take over my husband's legacy. How would she feel when she realized that she had been nothing more than a pawn in my game? How would she feel when she saw everything she had fought for crumble before her eyes? I didn't have to wonder for long. The phone call came in the early hours of the morning. Rachel's voice, shaky and unsteady, filled the silence. "What the hell have you done?" she demanded, her words laced with panic. I didn't answer immediately. I just let the silence hang in the air for a moment, letting her stew in her own fear. "You made your move," I said calmly. "Now it's my turn." The business was crumbling. The final chapter was written. And I wasn't done yet. The phone call came earlier than I expected, a shockwave that rattled through the quiet house like a distant storm. Rachel's voice, once confident and haughty, was now frantic, tinged with fear, desperation, and disbelief. "What the hell have you done?" she spat, her words sharp like knives. I paused for a moment, letting the weight of her words hang in the air, savoring the taste of victory that lingered on my tongue. The satisfaction that had been building over the past few weeks finally bubbled to the surface. I had waited for this moment, watched it unfold in slow motion, and now that it was here, I wasn't going to rush through it. This was the moment I had been building toward. "You made your move," I said, my voice calm and collected. "Now it's my turn." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could practically hear her heart racing, her breath coming in shallow bursts as she scrambled to process what had just happened. But it didn't matter now. The trap had been set, and all I had to do was wait for them to walk straight into it. "You don't get to do this," Rachel finally managed, her tone laced with venom. "I was promised." "Promised what?" I interrupted, a slow smile spreading across my face. "You were promised a seat at the table, weren't you? A position of power. But what you didn't realize is that power has a price. And it's one you're not willing to pay." I could hear her fumble for words, her panic rising with every breath. She was losing control, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "I'm calling my lawyer," she snarled, her voice trembling. "This isn't over." "I don't think you understand," I said, my voice lowering to a near whisper. "Your lawyer can't help you now. The injunction's been filed. The assets are frozen. The business is over." I heard her gasp, the weight of my words sinking in. The business they had fought so hard to take from me was no longer in their hands. It was mine. All mine. "I've already filed the paperwork," I continued, my voice steady. "And no one, not you, not your lawyer, not your family, can do a thing to undo it. The company can't operate without the land. And without the land they have nothing." Her silence was deafening, and I could almost see her standing there, staring at her phone, trying to come to terms with the reality of what had just happened. It was over. They had lost. I ended the call without another word, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of triumph, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. I had to make sure they understood the full extent of their mistake. I couldn't let them walk away from this unscathed. They needed to feel the weight of their actions. I leaned back in my chair, letting the moment wash over me. It wasn't about just winning. It was about taking back what was rightfully mine. It was about showing them that they couldn't just waltz into my life and destroy everything I had worked for. They thought they could play with my future, but now the tables had turned, and I wasn't about to let them off easy. As the day stretched on, the company's downfall became more and more apparent. I could almost feel the panic radiating from the board members, the investors, and everyone else who had believed they were untouchable. The pieces were falling apart, and the longer they waited to act, the harder it would be for them to recover. I couldn't help but think about my husband. I knew he had to be feeling the weight of everything. He had always been the optimistic one, always hoping that things would just work out. But this time there was no fixing it. This time they had gone too far. I needed to speak with him, to tell him everything that had been happening, to help him see the truth. The past few weeks had been tense between us. He hadn't known everything that had been going on behind the scenes. He had been caught in the whirlwind of family drama, thinking that if he just played his part, everything would go back to normal. But that wasn't going to happen. Not anymore. I walked into the living room where he sat slumped in a chair, his gaze distant. His eyes flickered up as I entered, and for a brief moment, I could see the weight of the situation in his expression. "Everything's done," I said softly, sitting beside him. "It's over." He looked at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean it's over?" "The business," I explained, my voice calm. "The injunction is in place. The assets are frozen. They have nothing left." His face went pale, and for a moment I saw the realization hit him. The family he had tried so hard to please, the business he had fought for, all of it was crumbling, and he had no power to stop it. "They're not going to be able to fix this," I continued, keeping my tone even. "They can't just walk away from this. They can't take what's mine." He leaned forward, his hands trembling as he pressed them against his forehead. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't have to fix anything," I said, reaching out to take his hand. "I've already taken care of it." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, trying to make sense of everything that had just been laid out. "How did you know?" he asked. "How did you know all of this was going to happen?" I smiled softly, squeezing his hand. "As I was watching. I was listening. I was always one step ahead." He sat back in his chair, a mixture of relief and guilt flooding his expression. "I should have seen it," he muttered, his voice heavy with regret. "I should have known what they were doing." "Don't," I said gently. "You didn't know. They used you. They manipulated you. But now we're free. This is our chance to rebuild." He nodded slowly, the weight of the situation still heavy on his shoulders. But for the first time in days, I saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about us. It was about our future. The next few days were filled with phone calls, meetings, and frantic attempts from my in-laws and Rachel to salvage what they could. But it was too late. The damage had been done, and there was no coming back from it. They had lost everything they had tried so hard to take from me. And in the end, I was left standing, stronger than ever, ready to take on whatever came next. The business was mine, the land was mine, and no one would ever take it from me again. The final blow had been struck, and it was my victory. As the dust settled and the chaos began to fade, I could finally breathe again. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one that was built on my terms, my power, and my resolve. They had underestimated me, but now they knew better. And I would make sure they never forgot it. I had never seen Rachel so vulnerable. She always prided herself on being the one with the power, the one who had all the answers. But now, as the reality of her situation set in, she was nothing more than a desperate woman clinging to the wreckage of her shattered ambitions. I could hear it in her voice when she called again, her tone quieter this time, a far cry from the venomous threats she had made before. "Please," she begged, her words barely audible. "We can fix this. We can work something out." It felt like a punch to the gut hearing her plead like that. Part of me wanted to take a step back to offer some shred of mercy, but I quickly pushed that thought away. Mercy was for those who hadn't tried to destroy everything I had built. Mercy was for those who hadn't taken my life and tried to turn it into their own playground. No, this was my moment, and I was going to make sure she understood that. "I don't think you understand, Rachel," I said calmly, my voice steady. "You don't have the power to fix anything anymore. It's over." There was a pause on the other end, a long, stretched silence that felt like it could last forever. I could hear the sound of her breathing, a ragged, uneven rhythm. The desperation was palpable, and I almost felt sorry for her. "Almost. You think you've won, don't you?" she finally replied, her voice low, almost a whisper. "But it's not over. You can't take everything from me." I closed my eyes, a brief flash of anger sparking within me, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about power. And I had it. She had no idea what she was up against. "I'm not trying to take anything from you," I said, letting the calmness of my voice hit her like a slap in the face. "You already gave it all away. You just didn't realize it until now." Her silence was thick, hanging between us like a cloud of tension. She wasn't ready to face the truth. She wasn't ready to accept that she had lost everything. And yet here we were. The company that had once been her prize was slipping through her fingers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "I'll make them sell," she muttered finally, her words filled with a quiet resignation. I'll make them sell the company to me. Her desperation echoed in my mind. Did she really think that would work? Did she honestly believe that after everything I would let her crawl back into a position of power? That would never happen. I had already made my move and the game was over. I had won and she was just too blind to see it. You don't have the leverage you think you do, I told her. You can't buy something that doesn't belong to you anymore. She scoffed, the sound bitter and sharp. You're wrong. It's my company. It was always mine. I could feel the sting of her words, but I wouldn't let them show. The reality of the situation was that Rachel had been living in a fantasy world, one where she was in control of everything. But now the dream was over and she had to face the nightmare she had created. The conversation ended abruptly, her desperate promises fading into the background as I hung up the phone. The calmness I had maintained was still with me, but now it was mixed with a strange sense of satisfaction. The final blow had been dealt, and all that was left to do now was to watch it unfold. I couldn't help but feel a certain sense of relief. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when everything they had tried to take from me came crashing down. It wasn't just the sale of the company that mattered now. It was everything that came with it. The land, the legacy, the power. I had it all and no one could take it from me. But even as I stood there victorious, a part of me couldn't help but wonder, was it enough? Could I truly walk away from all of this, knowing that they had been so close to destroying everything I had worked for? Was this enough to wash away the bitterness, the betrayal, the loss? The sound of my husband's footsteps broke me from my thoughts. He entered the room slowly, his eyes downcast, avoiding mine for the first time in days. I could see the weight of the situation bearing down on him, his shoulders slumped under the pressure of it all. I spoke to Rachel, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. She's asking us to sell. I raised an eyebrow, my expression unreadable. He hadn't spoken to her directly before. He had been avoiding it, unsure of what to say or how to handle the situation. But now here he was speaking the words I had been waiting for. We're not selling, I replied simply. There was no hesitation in my voice. We're not giving her anything. It's done. His eyes flickered up to meet mine, confusion and uncertainty still clouding his gaze. But, no, I interrupted, cutting him off before he could continue. You've seen how far she'll go to get what she wants. You've seen what she's capable of. This isn't about business anymore. This is about power. And I have it. We're not going to give it up now. He was silent for a moment, his gaze dropping again as he processed what I had said. I could see the fight in him, the part of him that still wanted to protect his family, to fix things. But it was too late for that. There was no fixing this. It was already done. We don't need to sell, I continued, my voice firm. We have everything we need. The land is ours. The business is ours. And no one is taking it from us. He nodded slowly, but I could see the weight of the world on his shoulders. He wasn't as certain as I was, not yet. But he would be. I would make sure of that. Later that evening I sat in the office staring out the window at the city lights. The sale was final now. The company was mine and Rachel and my in-laws had lost everything. It was a bitter victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. The phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated for a moment before picking it up, expecting another plea, another desperate cry for help. But instead it was a voice I hadn't heard in years. Congratulations, said the voice on the other end, smooth and calculated. You've won. But let's see how long you can keep it. A chill ran down my spine. Who was this? What did they want? But before I could respond, the line went dead. The room was still, the silence suffocating as I placed the phone down gently, my hand lingering on the receiver for a moment longer than necessary. The voice had lingered in my mind, chilling me to the core. It wasn't just an anonymous call. It was a reminder that in the world I now navigated, nothing was ever truly finished. Even in the victory I had fought for, shadows still lingered. I drew in a slow, steadying breath, trying to ground myself. The pieces were in place. The business, the land, everything that had been stolen from me was mine once more. And yet something was missing. A deep, gnawing ache still weighed on me. It wasn't the power, it wasn't the company. It was the part of me that had been torn apart when I first realized what they had done, the family I had loved for so long, now standing on the other side of a divide I had built brick by brick. Across the room my husband was pacing, his phone in hand, the light from the screen casting shadows across his face. I had no idea what he was thinking. Was he feeling the same sense of emptiness that I was? Or was he still lost in the idea of what could have been, the family he once thought he could save? I wanted to reach out to tell him it was over, that we could finally move on. But the words felt stuck in my throat. I wasn't sure we could move on from this. The price had been too high. Are you okay? His voice broke through my thoughts, low and tentative, as he finally stopped pacing and looked at me. I nodded, forcing a smile. Yeah, just thinking. The words felt hollow, but it was easier to say that than to admit the truth. I was trying to rebuild, trying to piece together what was left of everything I had once known. But the foundation was cracked and I wasn't sure how to repair it. How are you feeling? I asked him, my voice quieter now, betraying the vulnerability I had been hiding all this time. He took a deep breath, his eyes dropping to the floor as he exhaled slowly. I don't know, he admitted. I should feel relieved. We've won. But it doesn't feel like winning. It feels empty. I could see the guilt in his eyes, the unspoken words lingering between us. He hadn't been as involved as I was in all of this, had never fully understood the depths of the betrayal. To him it was still family. To me it was a war zone. I get it, I said softly. But we have a chance now. A chance to rebuild. His eyes lifted to meet mine and I could see the flicker of hope behind the doubt. Rebuild? He repeated, a little disbelief in his voice. From what? From the ashes of what they've done. Yes, I replied firmly, standing up from my chair and walking toward him. We rebuild. Not just the business but everything. We can start over. Together. The words hung in the air, but I wasn't sure if they were enough to fill the empty spaces between us. I had spent so long fighting for everything I had lost, fighting for power, for control, that I hadn't stopped to think about what came next. What comes after the battle? After the dust settles? I sat back down at the desk, pulling out the latest financial report. The numbers were good. Better than I had expected, actually. The company was thriving, and with my name firmly stamped on it, we were no longer at the mercy of anyone else. It was ours now, and I had every intention of making it grow. But even as I read the numbers, a small voice in the back of my mind asked, "What's the point if you're rebuilding just for yourself?" I glanced up, meeting my husband's eyes again. I know we've been through hell. But we have a fresh start now. I'm not just going to sit back and watch it all fall apart again. We'll rebuild not just the company but our lives. We're stronger now. We've been through too much to let it slip away. He didn't say anything at first, just nodded slowly as if weighing my words, absorbing their weight. The silence between us was heavy, but not entirely uncomfortable. It felt like the space was slowly shifting, the foundation of our relationship slowly beginning to rebuild, piece by piece. I want to believe you, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. But I don't know if we can just move on. Can we really forget everything they've done? I thought about it for a moment, the weight of the question pressing down on me. Could we forget? Would it ever be the same? No, I said finally, my voice stronger now. We can't forget. But we can move forward. We can let go of the things that hold us back and build something better. His gaze softened as he took a step closer. You're right, he said, his voice low with quiet resolution. We can do this. Together. I nodded, feeling a flicker of something new. It wasn't just about the company or the land. It was about reclaiming our future. Together. We had been through so much, had fought so hard, and now it was time to create something that was ours. Something that no one could take away. As the evening wore on, the weight of the day began to lift, replaced by a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in so long. I was rebuilding. But this time it was for the right reasons. It wasn't about revenge or proving something to my in-laws. It was about us, about creating something stronger, something more resilient. Later that night we sat down at the kitchen table, papers scattered around us as we made plans for the future. There was a new energy in the air, a quiet determination that had been lacking for so long. It was the start of something new, something we could control. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving. The phone buzzed again, breaking the silence. I glanced at the screen, expecting another call from my lawyer or some other business-related matter, but instead, it was an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, but only for a second before answering. Hello. A familiar voice greeted me on the other end. Congratulations on the victory, the voice said, smooth and calculated. But just know, this game isn't over yet. A chill ran down my spine as I listened to the voice, each word calculated, each syllable dripping with a quiet menace. The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the phone screen as it went dark. I looked at my husband, who had noticed my reaction. "What is it?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. I shook my head, trying to shake off the lingering sense of unease. "It's nothing. Just someone reminding me that we still have a long road ahead." He nodded, but I could see the same concern in his eyes. It wasn't just about rebuilding the business anymore. There were still threats lurking in the shadows, and I wasn't sure we would ever be free from the ghosts of our past. But for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid. We were rebuilding, and no one, not even the shadows, could take that from us. The sound of the phone buzzing on the table broke the heavy silence that had settled between us. I glanced at my husband, who had his eyes fixed on the paperwork spread out before him. His brow was furrowed, a deep sense of concentration masking the exhaustion I could see behind his gaze. The past few weeks had worn us both down, but tonight something felt different. There was a quiet shift in the air, a subtle change in the atmosphere that had nothing to do with the victories we had claimed, or the battles we had fought. I reached over and picked up the phone, the faint glow of the screen illuminating the darkened room. The unfamiliar number made my stomach tighten. Another call? Another shadow lurking behind our freshly rebuilt world? I didn't hesitate this time. I answered it, my finger brushing the screen with calm precision. "Hello." There was a brief pause before a voice I hadn't heard in what felt like forever replied. It was soft, calculated, one I recognized all too well. "Congratulations," the voice said, its tone dripping with faint admiration and something else I couldn't quite place. "You've done well. But let's see how long your new beginning lasts." My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my voice steady. "Who is this?" A low chuckle sounded from the other end, and I felt my pulse quicken. "Does it matter? You're on the verge of something great. But you and I both know nothing ever stays perfect, especially when you're the one who's built it from the ashes." The call ended abruptly before I could respond, the line going silent, leaving behind only a lingering tension. I stared at the phone, the unsettling sense that someone was still watching us creeping into my thoughts. "Who was it?" My husband's voice broke through my thoughts, and I glanced up at him. He had put down his papers, his eyes filled with concern and confusion. "Just someone reminding me that we're not completely free yet," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. The words felt foreign on my tongue, but I had to believe them. The world wasn't done with us, not yet. He didn't respond right away, his lips pressed into a thin line as he sat back in his chair. I could see the conflict brewing inside him, the uncertainty that had clouded his mind since all of this started. He still hadn't fully grasped the scope of what had happened, or maybe he didn't want to. It was easier to pretend that we could pick up the pieces and move forward without looking too closely at the damage. "I think it's time we stop looking over our shoulders," I said, finally breaking the silence. "We've fought hard for this, and I refuse to let anyone take it from us now." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and for the first time in a while I saw something shift. A spark of understanding, of realization. He nodded slowly, but there was something else in his gaze. A quiet resolve that hadn't been there before. "We've built something strong," he said, his voice steady but filled with the weight of his words. "We can't let anyone tear it down." I stood up, walking over to the window and looking out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. The night was calm, the world seemingly peaceful, but I knew better now. We had fought battles I hadn't even known I was preparing for, but now we had won. At least for the moment. But with every victory comes a new challenge. I wasn't foolish enough to think that everything would just fall into place. There were still too many forces out there, forces that had tried to break us before and would likely try again. I wasn't about to make the same mistake I had made before and let my guard down. The land, the business, the connections I had built. It was all mine now, and I wasn't about to let them slip away. But there was more at stake now than just the company. This was about rebuilding our lives, finding a way to move forward, to create something better than what we had before. Together. Turning away from the window, I walked back to the desk where my husband was still sitting. I took a deep breath and sat down beside him, the weight of everything that had happened settling heavily in my chest. It was all real now. The hard work, the sacrifices, it had all led to this moment. "It's not over," I said quietly, my fingers tracing the papers in front of me. but I'm ready to fight. Are you? He nodded, a determined look in his eyes. I'm with you. Always. We didn't need to say more. The words were understood. We had spent so much time battling the forces that tried to tear us apart. Now it was time to focus on what came next. As we sat together, planning, strategizing, I realized something. The business wasn't just about making money or gaining power. It was about building a future. A future where we could stand on our own without the shadows of betrayal or manipulation hanging over us. It was about creating something that mattered, something that could withstand anything life threw at us. In the days that followed, we began to rebuild. But this time it wasn't just about business. It was about trust, about family, about rediscovering who we were as individuals and as a couple. The power I had gained over the years wasn't just in the deals I made or the land I owned. It was in the relationships I rebuilt, in the strength I found within myself, and in the unspoken bond that had been forged between my husband and me. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the weight of everything seemed too much to bear. But every time I looked at him, every time I saw the flicker of hope in his eyes, I knew we were on the right path. We were stronger than we had ever been, and no one, could take that away from us. The future was ours to shape. The past might have been filled with pain, with betrayal and heartache, but it no longer had power over us. We had moved past it, had grown from it, and now we were standing at the threshold of something new. We didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. Together. And with that, I finally allowed myself to believe, truly believe, that this new beginning was more than just a fresh start. It was a chance to build something that could stand the test of time. A future that was ours, free from the shadows of the past.